At 32, Alice Morgan was at the top of her game. She became the head of cardiac surgery at one of Chicago's finest hospitals. Her hands, small, with long fingers that never painted their nails, knew their craft better than any textbook. Hundreds of surgeries, thousands of lives saved. Patients came to her from all over the country. Because the name Alice Morgan meant one thing: you will survive. She didn't consider herself a genius. She simply worked 16 hours a day, no vacations, no days off. The operating room became her home, her colleagues her family. She had no husband, no children. She had a scalpel, she had responsibility, and she had fear. Every night, returning to her empty apartment, she replayed every incision, every stitch in her head. What if it had been different? What if it could have been better? Her colleagues called her a perfectionist. Her patients called her an angel in gloves. She didn't argue. She was simply afraid. A mistake cost her life. It happened in March. Tuesday. Alice stood at the operating table for 10 hours straight. One difficult open heart surgery followed another emergency, patient after patient. She hadn't slept for over a day. Drank 3 cups of coffee and eaten 1 candy bar. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. But she couldn't leave. The patient was waiting. A man, 53 years old. Heart attack, complications. The operation was difficult. Alice did everything as usual, precisely, quickly, without hesitation. But at one point, while she was suturing a coronary artery, her hand trembled. For a second. Just a second. The suture didn't go perfectly. The bleeding started faster than expected. The anesthesiologist glanced at her. Alice didn't look up. She adjusted the suture, stopped the bleeding, and the operation was completed successfully. The patient survived. 2 weeks later, he was discharged home, healthy, laughing, grateful. No one but the 3 people in the operating room knew what had happened. But Alice knew. That night became her own personal hell. She couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark and saw that incision again and again. Uneven. Imperfect. If she'd rested, if she'd slept, if she hadn't been performing her 10th operation in a row, none of this would have happened. The incision would have been perfect. There wouldn't have been any bleeding. Everything would have been different. You're overreacting, a colleague told her. The patient is alive and well. You saved him, not killed him. I could have saved him better, Alice replied. She took a leave of absence. It didn't help. She saw a psychologist. He recommended pills and rest. She threw the prescription in the trash. She didn't need the pills. She needed the confidence that she could walk into the operating room again and not be afraid. But the confidence never returned. 2 months later, she resigned. The head of the clinic tried to persuade her to stay, offering her a part-time position, a sabbatical, any terms. Alice refused. She sold her apartment, donated her belongings, bought a used SUV, and drove off. She drove wherever her eyes led her. She ran out of gas and stopped in the village of Severny. 500 residents, 1 school, a store, an ambulance, sign on a rickety building. She walked into the paramedic station and said, "I need a job. I'm a doctor." The paramedic, an elderly man with a grey mustache, looked at her skeptically. "Do you have a diploma?" "I do. And experience." "Experience?" He chuckled. "Honey, experience isn't needed here. What's needed is legs. And nerves. Get ready to go out at 3 in the morning to see a granny with high blood pressure, in a snowstorm, off-road, without communication. You won't change your mind?" "I won't change my mind." So Alice became an emergency medical technician in Severny. The difference between Chicago and this place was like the difference between Mars and Earth. Instead of an operating room, there was a rusty Gazelle. Instead of a team of anesthesiologists and nurses, there was one driver, Victor, who knew every pothole and every dog in the area. Instead of complex cardiac surgeries, there were hypertensive crises, cuts, frostbite, pneumonia, and births in roadside ditches. At first, Alice felt like an imposter. She was used to sterility, to monitors, to the latest generation of defibrillators. Here, there was nothing. She administered IVs on her knee, listened to lungs with an old stethoscope, and when she ran out of medication, she drove 40 kilometers to the district hospital to beg the head doctor for them. But gradually, she got used to it. She even came to love this life. Here, no one knew who she was. To the locals, she was simply our new paramedic, Ellie. They called her at night, when a child had a fever, when an old man's heart stopped, when a man in the forest cut his leg with an axe. And she went. Always. Because here you couldn't say, "Make an appointment." Here, People just waited for you to arrive. 6 months later, she accidentally saved the life of a 9-year-old boy. He fell through the ice on the river and was pulled out 10 minutes later. The boy wasn't breathing. Alice performed CPR for half an hour, just when everyone around him had given up hope. His heart started pounding. The boy was taken to intensive care. He survived, never coughed up a single lung, and a month later was running like a healthy person. The boy's mother came to Alice at the paramedic station, fell to her knees, and cried. Alice picked her up, hugged her, and for the first time in a long time, felt no guilt, only fatigue and a quiet, dull joy. That evening, she sat on the porch, drinking tea and looking out at the endless field beyond the village. Victor sat down next to her. "You're not from around here," he said. "Don't be offended. I knew right away. You don't have the hands of a paramedic. You were a surgeon, right?" Alice didn't answer. "I know," he continued. "Doctors don't just run into such a remote place." "What happened?" "I was wrong," Alice said quietly. "The patient died." "No. He survived." "Then why did you run?" Alice was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Because I was afraid the mistake would happen again. That next time it would be death. That I have no right to risk it if I can do better, but I don't." Uncle Vitya lit a cigarette and exhaled smoke into the starry sky. "You know, I've been an ambulance driver for 40 years. Thousands of calls. And every time you think, could I have done it faster, differently, more correctly? And then you stop thinking. Because if you constantly blame yourself for what you've already done, it's impossible to live." What about responsibility? Responsibility is when you don't drink before your shift. When you check the first aid kit. When you don't drive past a call, even if you're really sleepy. And not when you kill yourself over a stitch that only you and 2 other people will see. He stubbed out his cigarette, patted her on the shoulder, and left. Alice was left alone. She looked at the field, at the stars, at the lights in the windows of the houses. She suddenly realized that more than a year had passed since that day. And in that year, she hadn't done anything wrong. She simply went, saved, helped. Without a scalpel, without an operating room, without lectures in Europe. She simply administered IVs, listened to lungs, held the hands of old women who were dying not from illness, but from loneliness. She received a call from Chicago. An old colleague offered to come back. "We've found a position for you. A good department, a young team, modern equipment. We need you, Alice." She thought for a long time. 3 days. She walked around the village, looking at the houses, the river, the school, the store where the clerk, Zinaida Ivanovna, always left fresh bread for her. She went into the paramedic station, looked at her old stethoscope, the call chart on the wall, and the door behind which Uncle Vitya slept. She called a colleague in Chicago and said, "No, thank you. I'm staying here." "Are you crazy? There are no prospects here. No money, no." "I'm here," Alice interrupted. "And I'm needed here. Really, not for dissertations, not for conferences, but to come to Grandma's at 3 in the morning and just be there. It's no less than heart surgery. Maybe even more." She hung up, sat down on a chair, and cried. For the first time in a long time, not from despair, but from a strange relief. She hadn't conquered her fear. She simply stopped fighting it. The next day, she picked up a scalpel. For the first time in a year and a half. Not on a patient, on herself. She bought a pig in a neighboring village, cut it open, and applied that very same stitch. Perfect, smooth, beautiful. Her hands didn't tremble. They remembered. And then she threw away the scalpel. Because she realized, she didn't want to be a surgeon anymore. She just wanted to be a doctor. The kind who arrives at 3 in the morning when a child has a fever. The kind who holds someone's hand before they die. The kind who isn't afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid of not showing up. Alice stayed in Severny. She lives in a small house by the river, lights the stove, goes to Zinaida Ivanovna's store, and goes out on calls every night. Sometimes she receives letters from Chicago, from former colleagues who don't understand her choice. She doesn't answer, because it's impossible to explain, only to feel. One day, returning from a call at 4 in the morning, she stopped the car in the middle of a field, turned off the headlights, and looked at the sky. There were so many stars that it was almost impossible to see. "I don't regret it," she said out loud. "Not a single mistake. Not a single decision. I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." Alice no longer held a human heart in her hands. But now she knew, there are many ways to save. Not just with a scalpel. Sometimes, just showing up is enough.